It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Kathy Debolt. Kathy is a retired 29-year from active duty from the U.S. Army Intelligence, Lieutenant Colonel. And now she's presently the program manager and action officer for the Army Intelligence Group in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And she runs a system there. She's a program manager for a thing called BAT. And she's going to talk about that tonight. It's the Biometric Automated Tool Set, which is doing wonderful things for the security of our country. And it's a system that's deployed worldwide in theater all around the world. I'll also tell you that Kathy has twice been awarded the Deputy Undersecretary, Department of Defense Award for Science and Technology. So Kathy truly is a technologist. And she's always doing things for the better good, and she really is out to help business and take advantage of new businesses that are providing good things that can be utilized for the efforts of the Army and the military. By the way, Kathy's been very instrumental in New Hampshire for some businesses, and she's helped us. We have an appropriation in play with the Department of Defense bill that's going before the President's signature now. It got past the committees and the Senate and the House. So we're very optimistic about that, and that's a very important appropriation for us for 2008. And she's done it for other businesses in New Hampshire. So she knows New Hampshire, and she's been a big help to the community. So I want to thank Kathy for her help and support and for very important steps in Animetrics, but more importantly for what she's doing to help national security and the security of all of us. She's been fantastic. And Matt Malinowski is also here with her tonight, who's also from U.S. Army Intelligence, who's also been very supportive. So thank you very much to Kathy and Matt, and welcome here from Fort Huachuca.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're using biometrics now. We talked about the terrorist threat. We talked about what's out there. And now I'm going to try to get a little bit down into the technologies and why we're involved in biometrics. I'm heavily involved in language translation. I've been involved in a lot of different technologies. I was involved being technical manager of an advanced concepts technology demonstration that dealt with human support tools. And through that, we did some language technology with a company called Transparent Language, which is also in New Hampshire. And that company now has sold huge contracts to DoD of the language training that we did. And it was all based on, for Arabic languages, Urdu, Pashto, the low-density languages that we had out there. All of it in support of humans that needed to learn how to communicate with other humans. But now we also have a place that we are going to have to identify the right humans and to be able to track them, tag them, and know who they are at any given time. Another thing for all of our citizens to understand is when you think about identity theft and identity fraud as being something that's just going to affect your bank account, your credit cards, or those kind of things, which is a real threat, by the way. It's one of the largest areas of crime that is growing in this country. It also is the way that we are allowing terrorists to come in and to get access to secure areas of airports. That's how in 911, 7 of the 19 hijackers were suspects. And if we had had biometrics on them and we had known that they were using somebody else's identity, we could have stopped them. So taking somebody else's identity on and using that in order to get into secure areas is not something that's new, but it's something, the ability to do it using the internet is something that should scare everybody in here. This is how people are going to continue to infiltrate our society at all levels of security. Some of you have heard just recently about the illegal female who was working at the CIA and the FBI. She used somebody else's paper. She had false paperwork. She did identity theft and identity fraud. 2 weeks ago, the Chicago airport had 23 illegal immigrants that they found that had identity cards, real identity cards. They were actually expired ones, but what they were told is, go in this box, pick an identity card that has a picture that looks a lot like you, and we'll just reissue that. We'll take the picture out of there and we'll reissue you a new one. And 23 of them were working behind lines. You may say, oh, well, they were Hispanic, they were from Mexico, they weren't going to hurt anybody. But what I'm trying to say is it's very easy to do this We can't say because they're one ethnic group or another that doesn't pose a security threat for us. If we don't know the identities of people who we are letting into these secure areas, who have access to protecting us in the very areas where we fly, the very skies that caused all those buildings to be blown up that you saw at the beginning, then we are going to find that this is going to happen again and again. And so it is frightening. Identity theft and fraud does not just belong in your credit card and watching your credit report. It belongs in, and all of us need to understand, everyday life we have to protect the identities that we have, that our children have, because it can be used in a perverted way to attack our very way of life. And we need to understand that, and we need to protect against it. So biometrics is important. One of the things that we're talking about with Animetrics now is because they are using 3D, and we're going to go into that a little bit more. But this was the very first terrorist that was identified using our system, where we knew that we had him in the system from before he was let go. We don't keep everybody in prison forever and ever, and you might think we do in Iraq, Afghanistan, but we take them to the courts, and when they've served their time for weapons dealing or whatever they're doing, as long as they didn't commit murder and have bombs against people, they're let out. We put alerts on them saying they're kind of not good people, they're criminals, they have a criminal record, and we put alerts on them. But this person was let out of Abu Ghraib prison, and then he was picked up again in an area where they were suspicious that he was dealing in weapons that were going to be used, weapons caches, and dealing in weapons against the Americans again. But if you look at these two pictures, right off the bat, you wouldn't say they were the same person, probably. Once the fingerprints identified them as the same person on the bottom, then we could go in and say, oh, wait a minute, he's got this scar, and you start looking at those kind of things. What we want to use is the technology of companies like Animetrics. We use iris technologies in order to help us to identify folks that don't look the same, but really are the same underneath. And by using some of the leading edge technology, that's how we're going to do it. We need to apply these in places like in our airports, where you're just walking down, so that you don't have to go over and give up your fingerprint. It's something that we have biometric enabled watch lists. Instead of saying, hey, your name is Cat Stevens, so I'm holding you here for 3 days until I can figure out if you're the Cat Stevens that's on my watch list, or just the singer and I'm going to let you in the country. We need to have watch lists that are biometrically enabled for the bad guys. That doesn't mean everybody in the country necessarily has to go over and give up their biometric, but it may mean that eventually, that for our ID cards, we have to have a biometric in order to positively identify that we are who we say we are. That's something that's going to have to be worked out in the future. But we want to use technologies to help us get past the fact that a soldier or a Marine would not have been able to tell that those two people in those two pictures were the same. And they would not have been able to do that. So we use fingerprints and we use iris, but we also want to use pictures. If we can use passive surveillance methodology, it helps us collect on people that we may not have fingerprints on. We may not have iris or the capability of collecting it. But we can still identify that that's a bad person from across the street during a surveillance. Or if I'm just driving down the road in Baghdad and I have a video camera that's on the outside of my vehicle, and as I'm going along, I'm taking video of the crowds that are near my vehicle, and I want to make sure it's not someone who's going to try to be a suicide bomber against my vehicles. And if during that passive sweep I can use the avatars that we're getting out of Animetrics in order to positively identify that that person back there is a known Taliban, Al-Qaeda member, and we want to make sure that then that person is secure without stopping the vehicle, without having to, we can identify them before they can get to killing our soldiers and our young men and women, then that's where we're trying to go with the technologies. That's why it's so exciting for us to find technologies like Animetrics that we can apply to a system that's already deployed, that already has over 800,000 suspicious people. Not everybody is a bad person, but all of them are not Americans that are in there, and at least 50% of them probably have some suspicions attached to them of the ones that are currently in there. So this is real important to us to find technologies like we found at Animetrics.